The movie starts in a hotel room where pilot Whip Whitaker wakes up with one of his flight attendants, Katerina Marquez. The condition of the room tells us that they had had a wild night of alcohol, cigarettes, and intercourse. Whip's ex-wife calls him to talk about their son, but Whip dismisses her, saying that they can talk later. Katerina gets ready and leaves for the airport for their next flight while Whip is still hungover. He snorts a line of cocaine to wake himself up and gets ready. Whip then gets to the airport and into the flight. He is welcomed by Katerina and another flight attendant named Margaret Thomason. He meets his co-pilot Ken Evans. As the two prepare for the flight, Whip asks Margaret for an aspirin, claiming he hasn't slept in 2 days. Somewhere else, a drug addict prostitute named Nicole comes out of a hotel room after a night with her client. She goes directly to her dealer's place and asks him for drugs. He offers her to be in an adult movie for money, but she declines. She buys a small quantity of heroin from him. The dealer warns her to be careful with the drug because it hasn't been cut. Back in the flight, Whip and Ken take off despite the bad weather. They ascend a little aggressively. Ken seems to notice Whip's weird behavior but doesn't say anything. Whip asks to fly the plane himself instead of keeping it on autopilot. The turbulence gets worse as they reach a higher altitude. Whip then levels off the original route to avoid an area of smooth air. He pushes the plane higher and faster in an attempt to make it reach a higher altitude. Ken is nervous about the decision, but Whip assures him that he knows what he is doing. Ken reports to the flight control that they are diverting from their original path because of the weather. Whip takes the plane to a safer level and stabilizes it. The turbulence finally stops, and the passengers applaud in appreciation of the pilots. Meanwhile, Nicole reaches her home and sees her perverted landlord inside. He is there to ask her for the due rent. She forcefully sends him outside to wait until she showers. But instead, she brings out the drug and injects herself with it. As she feels its effects, the landlord yells at her to open the door. At the same time, Whip comes out of the cockpit to apologize to the passengers for the aggressive takeoff. While announcing, he pours 3 mini vodka bottles into an orange juice and drinks it. Sometime later, Margaret walks into the cockpit to see the plane on autopilot and Whip sleeping peacefully. The mission control informs Ken that the plane is ready to descend. As he presses a few keys, aggressive turbulence pushes the plane forward, waking Whip up. The passengers start to panic. Margaret asks everyone to fasten their seatbelts quickly. Ken and Whip try to control the plane, but the steering mechanisms don't seem to work. Now, they are going on a straight dive without control. They inform the mission control about the hydraulics not working, but receive no useful feedback. Whip stays calm and asks Ken to ditch the plane's fuel. He also tries several different emergency maneuvers to bring the plane back under control, but is unsuccessful. Whip calls Margaret into the cockpit to help him pull down a lever. She straps herself in place and helps the pilot, but the plane doesn't stabilize. A forceful jerk makes one of the stewardesses hit her head and fall unconscious. As the plane is about to hit the land, Whip thinks of an idea. He asks Ken to retract the flaps and the gears because they are going to roll down. Then, he asks Margaret to say, "I love you" to her son because the black box is recording. He knows that saving the plane is not possible now. Whip gets a little control of the steering and rolls the plane upside down to make it go at a lower speed, and buy them some time to find a safer landing spot. The stewardess who fell earlier rolls around and falls to the ceiling. The passengers are in a panic when one little boy mistakenly unstraps himself. Katerina goes to help him and fastens his seatbelts. Below, Nicole's landlord and a paramedic rescue her as she has overdosed. They, too, see the upside-down plane flying in the sky. Back in the plane, Whip keeps himself composed, but Ken starts to panic. Both of the engines fail at the same time. Whip turns the airplane over again, ready to crash land. They slowly descend to a field, and one wing hits a church's tower, shearing it off. The plane then slams onto the field. Whip's head bangs against the steering yoke, and he knocks out. We see Katerina's body lying limp on the ground as Margaret cries in the background. The paramedics arrive and rescue the passengers and the crew members. The plane is broken in half. Whip wakes up on a hospital bed and sees his friend and a pilots union representative, Charlie Anderson, in his room. Charlie praises him for saving a lot of lives. As it turns out, only 6 out of the 102 people on the plane died, including Katerina, another stewardess, and 4 passengers. His co-pilot is in a coma. Whip has incredibly managed to save a lot of people considering the situation they were in. The people from the National Transportation Safety Board come to interview him and leave after asking some questions. Shortly after, Whip's friend, Harling, brings Whip some cigarettes and alcohol, but Whip refuses to drink. Harling informs him that his home is surrounded by the media, who are dying to take his interview. His heroic deed is being praised by everyone. Whip asks Harling to bring his clothes and belongings to the hospital because he is getting discharged the following day. Later, Whip goes to the hospital's staircase to smoke and comes across Nicole, the prostitute who had previously overdosed. A talkative cancer patient joins the two. The three smoke while talking about several things. The patient believes that there's no way to stop things from happening. Like him getting cancer and Whip landing the plane, the three of them meeting there was also inevitable. After he leaves, Whip asks for Nicole's address and promises to visit one day. After being discharged, Harling takes Whip to his family home on a farm because his home is surrounded by the reporters. When he gets to the farmhouse, he pours all the alcohol in the house down the drain. He has made his decision to get sober. Later, Whip gets a call from Charlie, who invites him to meet a lawyer named Hugh Lang. He goes to meet them and gets to know that the NTSB has found out about him being intoxicated before the flight. Since someone has to compensate for the deaths of the passengers, they are likely to blame Whip for being intoxicated, which can result in life imprisonment. Whip doesn't take this information well and goes to the bar and starts to drink again. He buys a bulk of alcohol on his way back and stops by Nicole's place. Her landlord is forcefully trying to get money from her. Whip gets there just in time to get him off her. He offers the man some money and brings Nicole to his farmhouse after realizing she has nowhere to go. That night, the two end up having sex. Over the next few days, Whip continues to avoid the press, but soon realizes that his reputation could be plagued by the others who were around him. At Katerina's funeral, he meets Margaret, who claims she could tell that Whip was drunk when she encountered him that morning. Whip then starts to get personal, claiming that if not for him, she could have ended up dead as well. Whip then visits Ken at the hospital. Ken explains he hasn't told the NTSB, who have been investigating the crash, about his suspicions on Whip's condition at the time. Ken knows what Margaret does. Whip was hungover in the cockpit, and that he may have been drunk when the accident occurred. Even though he may never walk again, Ken and his wife believe that his survival was a miracle. The couple is strictly religious and insists that Whip pray with them, which he does reluctantly. Meanwhile, Nicole has been turning her life around, getting a job at a grocery store, and has been attending self-help meetings to sober up from drug addiction. She takes Whip with her to one of the meetings, but an uninterested Whip leaves midway. Shortly afterward, Nicole finds Whip working on the Cessna in his father's garage. Whip tries to persuade Nicole to fly to Jamaica with him. She stops him and claims that he needs rehab, which angers Whip. The two get into an argument, and Nicole storms off into the house. The following morning, Nicole leaves him a note and flees from the farmhouse with her luggage. Saddened by her departure, Whip starts to drink even more. One day, he comes back to his farmhouse to see reporters waiting for him. With nowhere else to go, he rushes to his ex-wife's house. However, since he is drunk, his family doesn't want him there. Whip gets into an argument with his son and is kicked out of the house. Outside, the media surround him. He manages to get away after giving vague answers to their questions. Charlie is outraged by Whip's alcoholism. They are trying to prove that he wasn't intoxicated on the flight, but he is making it harder by drinking every day. For the next 8 days, Whip stays with Charlie. Hugh has managed to have Whip's alcohol test thrown out on a technicality, but they still need to have Whip present his side of the story to Ellen Block, the investigator for the NTSB. The evening before the hearing, Whip is brought to his hotel room. Nervousness gets the best of him that night. He cannot sleep or go through the documents that Hugh had prepared for him. When he looks at the room's mini fridge, he finds all kinds of alcohol have been removed. However, he discovers a door that leads him to the other room. The mini fridge inside that room is fully stocked with alcohol. Whip tries to control himself but is unsuccessful. The following day is the day of the hearing. Charlie and Hugh knock on his door. When Whip doesn't open it, they walk inside using an extra set of keys. They are shocked to find the room trashed and bottles of alcohol scattered everywhere. Whip is in the bathroom, completely drunk and out of his mind. He asks Charlie to call Harling and bring him some cocaine. Charlie and Hugh have no other way to get Whip back to his senses before the hearing, so they agree. Harling comes to the hotel room and snorts cocaine along with Whip. Whip then gets ready and leaves the hotel confidently. At the hearing, Block doesn't suspect Whip at all. She instead claims that the cause of the plane dysfunctioning was a damaged jack screw in the tail of the plane that was supposed to be repaired a few years ago. The jack screw forced the tail stabilizer to turn around, which caused the plane to dive. However, after saying that, Block reveals that they have found 2 empty bottles of vodka in the crash, which was only accessible to the flight crew. She adds that Katerina, who has a history of alcoholism, must have had the alcohol and asks Whip what he thinks. Whip goes silent for a few seconds and finally admits that he drank the vodka, not Katerina. Everyone present at the hearing gasps, and Charlie tries to object but is dismissed. Whip finally confesses that he was drunk and high while piloting the plane and is drunk right now too. In the following scene, we see Whip in prison with his fellow prisoners. He tells them that the hearing was his breaking point, and he couldn't lie anymore. It has been 13 months since the hearing. He believes that he will be there for the next 4 years. While in prison, he has sobered up and improved his relationship with his wife and son. We see his son visit Whip to know more about his father. He refers to Whip as the most fascinating person he has ever seen and takes his interview for his college essay. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.